Imagine this: a former president of Zambia, Edgar Chagwa Lungu, passes away in exile, far from his homeland. But instead of unity, instead of mourning in peace, his death sparks one of the most dramatic political standoffs in Zambia's history. For days, his body has remained in limbo. The family insists on one thing. The government demands another. And caught between grief and politics, the nation is left wondering, who truly controls Edgar Lungu's final resting place? Now, for the first time, the truth emerges. Secret mediation talks have begun. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and the public eye, members of the Lungu family and high-ranking government officials sit across the table. Their mission? To end a bitter burial dispute that threatens to divide Zambia even further. But questions remain. Why is the family so determined to defy the state? What hidden interests are driving the government's strategy? And most importantly, will these secret negotiations bring closure, or unleash a storm even bigger than before? This is not just a burial. This is a showdown over power, legacy, and the future of Zambia itself. Welcome to InspirAfrica Official, the home of Africa's most powerful political documentaries and untold stories. In this episode, we dig deep into Zambia's most sensitive crisis yet, the burial showdown of former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu. What should have been a moment of national mourning has instead turned into a political battlefield. On one side, the Lungu family, determined to protect their wishes, their dignity, and perhaps their secrets. On the other, the Zambian government, led by President Hakainde Hichilema, standing firm on its authority, its laws, and its vision for national order. The stakes could not be higher. Because this is not only about where Edgar Lungu is laid to rest. It's about power. It's about legacy. And it's about who truly writes the final chapter of Zambia's recent history. Tonight, we'll uncover the secret mediation talks now taking place. We'll reveal the hidden pressures, the political calculations, and the explosive consequences this burial dispute could unleash, not just for the Lungu family, but for the entire nation. So stay with us, because what you're about to see will change how you understand this story forever. The body in limbo. What if I told you that even in death, former President Edgar Lungu still holds Zambia hostage? His body, instead of being laid to rest, is caught in a tug-of-war that has shocked the nation. The family says one thing. The government says another. And in between, the people are left wondering, why can't Zambia bury its own former head of state? The saga begins not at the grave, but in a standoff. Edgar Lungu's body lies in uncertainty. Days stretch into weeks, and still no burial. Why? Because the Lungu family insists on their wishes. They demand control. They argue it is a private family matter, not a state affair. But the government pushes back. Officials remind everyone that Lungu was not just a husband or a father. He was a president, and his burial carries national weight. But here's the twist. The more both sides fight for control, the more rumors grow. Was the delay just about ceremony? Or was there something deeper, something hidden within the body itself? Some whisper that cremation was demanded to erase secrets. Others suspect the state wants the burial to prove a point of dominance. But the truth? Still locked away. And so, Zambia waits. Supporters mourn. Critics shout. The public is caught in confusion, asking, who really owns a man's legacy? His family? Or his nation? Behind the scenes, emotions boil. Esther Lungu refuses to bow. HH's government insists on its rights. Neither side is willing to give in. And in the silence of this deadlock, another question rises. How long can a body remain in limbo before the truth comes crashing out? The funeral that should have united Zambia has instead divided it. A moment of mourning has turned into a battlefield of power, memory, and control. And while the nation prays for closure, the conflict shows no sign of ending. But this is only the beginning. Because as the body lies waiting, secret mediators are already moving in the shadows. Who are they? What deals are being made? And will they bring peace or betrayal? Stay with us, because in the next episode, Esther versus the state, we reveal how Zambia's most powerful widow went head-to-head with the government, and why her fight may change everything. Esther versus the state. When a former president dies, most expect a nation to unite in mourning. But Zambia's story took a darker turn. Because in this battle, one woman stood in the middle of the storm, Esther Lungu. From the start, she refused to bend. To Esther, her husband's body was not just a symbol of politics. It was family. It was dignity. And it was hers to protect. She declared that no government, no president, and no law could dictate how Edgar Lungu should be laid to rest. But that defiance sparked something far greater than grief. The government pushed back. Officials argued that Edgar Lungu belonged to Zambia, not just to the Lungu household. He had led the nation, carried state power, and with that came state responsibility. They demanded a national funeral. They insisted the body was a matter of public honor, not private choice. But here's where it gets intense. The more Esther resisted, the louder the whispers became. Was she simply defending her husband's memory? Or was she hiding something? Some claimed she feared an autopsy, afraid of what might be revealed. Others said she was using the burial fight as a weapon, a way to show strength against President HH. But what if both were true? Every statement Esther made carried weight. Every silence felt strategic. And while she spoke of respect, many saw politics behind her grief. In her stand, supporters rallied, calling her a brave widow. Critics, however, painted her as a power player, more concerned with legacy than closure. And the tension only grew worse. On one side stood the Lungu family, demanding privacy. On the other, the government, insisting on state control. It was no longer just about a burial. It was about authority. About who truly held power in Zambia's most delicate moment. Yet, in the shadows, new players began to emerge. Because when both sides refused to give in, others quietly stepped forward, offering to mediate. But who were they? Religious leaders? Foreign diplomats? Or secret envoys serving their own interests? The truth would shock the nation. Because these mediators weren't just there to calm tensions. Some had their own stakes in the outcome. And their involvement could either bring peace or ignite betrayal. Stay tuned, because in the next episode, The Secret Mediators, we uncover the hidden hands moving behind the scenes, and why their role may decide the fate of Edgar Lungu's final resting place. The secret mediators. While Zambia argued in the open, something else was happening in the shadows. The standoff between the Lungu family and the government had reached a boiling point. Neither side wanted to surrender. Neither side could afford defeat. And so, whispers began to spread, whispers of secret mediation. At first, no one knew who was involved. Then names started to surface. Church leaders. Foreign envoys. Political insiders. But why were they really there? Were they peacemakers, or power brokers? The church presented itself as neutral. A moral voice, urging respect, dignity, and unity. But even here, critics questioned their role. Were they truly mediating, or quietly leaning toward the government's side to preserve influence? Foreign diplomats, too, were drawn into the chaos. South African envoys, regional allies, even Western observers, all quietly pressing for resolution. They claimed it was about stability. But many wondered, did these outsiders care about Zambia's mourning, or were they simply protecting their own interests in a fragile region? And then came the most intriguing players of all, political insiders. Men and women who had once stood close to Lungu, now acting as go-betweens. Some worked to protect the family's wishes. Others, it seemed, were secretly negotiating with the government. Betrayal was not just possible, it was inevitable. Behind closed doors, these mediators began shaping deals. What if the government allowed a private burial, in exchange for silence on corruption cases? What if the family agreed to state honors, to avoid deeper investigations? Every word carried weight. Every whisper could decide where, when, and how Zambia's former president would be laid to rest. But here's the catch, none of these talks were public. Ordinary Zambians were kept in the dark, left to speculate as the fate of their former leader's body was quietly decided by a handful of hidden players. And that secrecy only fueled more suspicion. Were these mediators really preventing a crisis, or cutting secret deals that betrayed both the family and the nation? One thing became clear, the burial of Edgar Lungu was no longer just about tradition or respect. It had become a chess game of power, and the mediators were moving pieces in silence. But what happened next would push Zambia to the edge. Because as these talks dragged on, the nation itself grew restless. Streets began to buzz, voices grew louder, and the tension spilled into public life. Stay tuned, because in the next episode, A Nation in Suspense, we uncover how ordinary Zambians reacted to the deadlock, and why their anger threatened to turn mourning into chaos. A Nation in Suspense. The halls of power were locked in secret talks. But outside, on the streets of Zambia, the people were growing restless. Days turned to weeks. The burial of Edgar Lungu, a moment that should have brought closure, remained stuck in limbo. And the silence was deafening. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the government was deliberately delaying to weaken the PF. Others whispered that the Lungu family was hiding the truth about the body. Every day without answers added fuel to the fire. And Zambia found itself caught between grief and suspicion. In Lusaka, the tension was visible. Radio call-ins exploded with anger. Social media brimmed with conspiracy theories. In churches, prayers for peace mixed with debates about dignity, honor, and justice. It wasn't just about Lungu anymore. It was about the soul of the nation. Supporters of the former president demanded respect. They said he deserved to be buried as a statesman, with full honors. To them, the delay was an insult, a deliberate attempt to erase his legacy. But critics saw it differently. They argued that honoring Lungu meant forgetting years of corruption, hardship, and betrayal. For them, the delay was proof that justice was finally catching up. The divide grew sharper. Friends argued. Families split. Entire communities debated whether Zambia was honoring a hero or protecting a villain. And then came the whispers of protests. PF loyalists began hinting at demonstrations. Government supporters pushed back, warning of unrest. Police prepared for the worst. Suddenly, the funeral of one man threatened to ignite chaos across the entire nation. But here's where it gets even darker. While the people argued, the mediators continued their secret work. What deals were being made in private rooms, even as the public cried for answers? And how much longer could the government and the Lungu family keep the nation waiting before everything boiled over? The suspense was unbearable. Every passing day without a decision became a ticking time bomb. And when Zambia finally heard the next move, it would not come from the people. It would come from the courts. Because the dispute was no longer just political. It was about to become legal. Stay tuned, because in the next episode, Legal Firestorm, we take you inside the courtroom battles that would decide the fate of Edgar Lungu's body, and expose the true power struggle behind the scenes. Legal Firestorm. When politics could not settle the burial dispute, the battle moved to the courts. And suddenly, Edgar Lungu's body was no longer just a symbol of grief, it became a legal case. The Lungu family's lawyers argued that this was a private matter. They said the government had no right to interfere with the burial of a husband and father. The Constitution, they claimed, gave families the power to decide how to bury their loved ones. But the government's legal team struck back hard. They reminded the court that Edgar Lungu was not an ordinary man. He had been head of state. He had carried the instruments of power. And with that office came state obligations. His body, they argued, was not just family property, it was national heritage. Courtrooms filled with tension as each side presented its case. Supporters crowded outside, chanting, waving placards, demanding justice. Journalists camped on the steps, waiting for every update. And every legal argument only deepened the mystery: who truly controlled the fate of Edgar Lungu? But here's where things became explosive. Hidden within the filings were hints of deeper fears. The government quietly suggested the need for forensic clarity. Was there something in Lungu's medical history the family didn't want revealed? The family, in turn, accused the state of using the burial as a weapon, a tool to humiliate them even after Lungu's death. The judges faced a storm. On one side, the law of family rights. On the other, the law of state duty. How could they decide without tearing Zambia apart? Behind the legal drama, whispers of deals continued. Some said both sides were preparing to compromise. Others warned that if the courts ruled too strongly in favor of one party, the streets could erupt. The stakes were no longer just about a body. They were about law, power, and Zambia's fragile stability. And as the hearings dragged on, another question lingered: what price would each side be willing to pay for peace? Because in the corridors outside the courtroom, quiet negotiations had already begun. Not about law, not about justice, but about survival. Stay tuned, because in the next episode, The Price of Peace, we reveal the secret concessions both sides were forced to consider, and why the burial of Edgar Lungu came to look less like closure, and more like a deal with consequences. The price of peace. By now, the battle over Edgar Lungu's burial had dragged the nation through grief, politics, and even the courts. But as the deadlock grew dangerous, both the Lungu family and the government began to realize one truth: there would be no peace without compromise. And compromise, in Zambia's politics, always comes with a price. Behind closed doors, negotiations began. Mediators urged calm. Religious leaders pressed for dignity. But in these private rooms, dignity was not the only thing on the table. Power was. Survival was. The government hinted it might allow the family more control over the burial, but in return, it wanted something. Silence. Silence about certain cases. Silence about certain secrets. To some, it looked less like peace, and more like a bargain. The family, meanwhile, weighed its options. If they agreed to a state-led ceremony, they risked losing their independence, and perhaps opening the door to investigations. But if they held firm, they risked being painted as selfish, secretive, and even guilty of hiding the truth about the late president's death. It was a dangerous calculation. What mattered more, protecting the family, or protecting the legacy? Whispers spread of deals being drafted. Would corruption cases against the Lungus quietly disappear in exchange for burial honors? Would the government step back from the body, if Esther Lungu and her children stepped back from politics? The price of peace grew higher with every passing day. And for ordinary Zambians, who only wanted closure, the whole affair felt like betrayal. Was this really about mourning a leader, or cutting political bargains on the back of his death? But here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because just as compromises seemed close, cracks began to appear within the family itself. Not everyone agreed with Esther's hardline stand. Some whispered of betrayal. Others looked toward the state for their own advantage.